So today I'm going to make the world's greatest chili. This is from Rick Bayless's website. If you've never heard of Rick Bayless, he's pretty much a badass chef. He won the Bravo Top Chef Masters competition. The recipe is not from this cookbook because the recipe is not really Mexican. It's Tex-Mex or Southwestern or what have you. But most Americans are familiar with chili. What really makes this one compelling is simplicity of the recipe and these. These are ancho chilies, which are dried poblano chilies. They're key to the recipe. Important thing to look for is that they're still flexible, kind of like fruit leather, dried apricot type of texture. Often you'll find them in the store, and if you bend them, they'll crack and flake, and that means that they're too old, and a lot of the volatiles that are going to give the chili flavor may have already dried off, and you won't be left with as good as a flavor. It'll still work, but the whole idea here is to take a simple dish and elevate it to the utmost that is possible, for special occasions or just because you like food. So the important things that you can do to make the recipe turn out better: getting quality ingredients, fresh garlic, cornmeal, dried cumin, fresh onions. These fire roasted diced tomatoes, the recipe calls for 1 can. I'm obviously doubling the recipe. These are the best I found. They work pretty nicely. The recipe calls for pinto beans. I'm doubling the recipe as I mentioned. I'm using black and pinto. I think black beans give kind of a little bit of a depth of flavor that the pinto beans don't. Calls for 1.5 pounds of beef. I'm using 7% beef to cut down on the grease, as well as mixing it up with some pork, just again to give it a little bit of depth of flavor. Eventually the recipe is going to call for adding water, and there's a little bit of a controversy as to switching out the water for beer. You can make it too bitter, and I've certainly done that. You can use a lighter beer, but I actually kind of like the bitterness, a slight bitterness of the chili, for the same reason that I like bitterness in chocolate and coffee and what have you. It just gives it an interesting depth of flavor, and this one actually is too good to put in chili. I'm going to be drinking this myself. This is my favorite beer. If you haven't had it, it's one of the best in the world. It's made in Southern California, in Escondido, California, in San Diego County. Other things that I'm changing up is instead of just a straight doubling the recipe, I'm adding extra onion, plenty of extra garlic, because I found that I just like the way it turns out better. If you don't like those things, well, then don't do it. So the first thing the recipe calls for is to cut these ancho chilies in half and then toast them briefly on each side to bring out a little bit of flavor. So that's what I'm going to do now. So just pull these out, discard, split them open. This is all going to get ground up anyway, so it doesn't have to be pretty. Pour the seeds out. And there's one. And you can feel it feels like a dried apricot in terms of its little bit of stickiness. And the idea is that we're going to toast these on each side, and it'll bring out some of the flavors in the oil. Okay. So over medium heat, we're going to throw down some chilies in the bottom of the pan. Okay, the peppers are properly toasted now. Let them rehydrate with warm water. I probably wouldn't use boiling water on this just because it might extract flavor that will then get dumped down the drain. So just warm water to rehydrate these for about 30 minutes. Calls for 4 tablespoons of olive oil. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the idea here is to brown the meat and the onions, which takes a little longer when you double the recipe. Over medium-high heat. So I'm going to be doubling the recipe. It's going to take quite a while to brown everything, so I'm just going to go ahead and use the second pot to get the meat started so I don't have to wait as long. Okay, looks like the onions are cooked down, getting a little bit caramelized, so I'll go ahead and add the rest in now that I've gotten it up to temperature. Now, I'm no expert on this, but my wife tells me that when you're browning meat and onions, basically you're looking to see all this liquid cook off, and when it starts to sizzle after that's cooked off, then you know it's brown. And I think the idea is to caramelize the meat a little bit as well as the onions. I'm going to add the fresh cumin. Take a quick peek. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Chili. Okay, now we add this pureed chili, cumin, and garlic into our pot for about 5 or 10 minutes. Man, if you could smell this now, it's absolutely heavenly. The cumin, the garlic, the smells of the beef and pork, and the onions. It's not something that you're going to forget. Okay, so instead of adding 4 cups of water, I've got some barley wine style ale. We're going to simmer with 4 cups of this for about 45 minutes. Okay, simmer like this for 45 minutes. Okay, going to add 2 cans of diced fire roasted tomatoes. 2 15-ounce cans, these are 14.5, close enough. Okay, I've opened the cans of beans, 1 black, 1 pinto, rinsed, drained, and the 4 tablespoons of masa harina or cornmeal. Okay, so at this point it says to partially cover and simmer for another 30 minutes. When you serve it, you know, sky's the limit, but typically sour cream, thinly sliced green onions, and then some sort of cheese. My favorites are aged sharp cheddar or sometimes smoked cheese if you want a kind of a deeper, smokier flavor. But I can tell you, it just smells so incredibly good. Serving suggestions, maybe with some homemade cornbread, and certainly a beer or two would work well with this. Anyway, bon appetit.